Hello educators and welcome to EL Live. I'm Anthony Rabora, the Editor-in-Chief of ASCD's Educational Leadership. I'm back with some great news stories from the ASCD community. As always, we're taking precautions. You can see that I'm filming in my home office. This time we're thinking about our kindergarten through third grade students. How can we give early learners a great start during these foundational years when they're also being challenged by a pandemic and other pressures? We've got some great stories to help you. First and second grade teacher Justin Minkel talks about his experiences helping students in crises. And psychologist and author Wendy Ostroff gives us tips for keeping remote learning social and interactive for younger students. But first, Ed Talk. You've got a lot to say and we're listening to every word. The October issue of EL got this response from Stony Brook School. This work is absolutely critical to foster environments that best support all students. Thank you, EL Magazine, for producing this issue. Author Brudy Kafele gave a shout out to Dina Simmons for her ASCD in-service blog post titled, "If we aren't addressing racism, we aren't addressing trauma." Kafele wrote, "I have read well over 100 education articles this year, and I can say definitively that this is the most powerful and relevant read in 2020. We want to hear more. Tweet at EL Magazine and at ASCD to keep up the conversation. Now here's Educational Leadership's Managing Editor, Naomi Tier, with award-winning teacher Justin Minkel.
What have you found are some of the best ways to reach your very young students and help them feel okay?
I think some of the things that matter the most are actually the simplest. I think a big one is just really listening to them and finding out in their own words what's going on and kind of being patient as they talk through that. I think a stumbling block for us when something new and scary happens like COVID is we just don't really know what to say. And I think that's okay. I think sometimes we don't need to find the right words. We need to help kids find their own words to process it. And I think the other thing is that a lot of times it's not even really about words. Like one thing I've learned teaching young kids is that they're not just small adults, right? Like they're fundamentally different kinds of humans. And I think one of the big differences, even with second graders, is they're not in their heads quite as much as we are as adults. Like they're really in their bodies and their emotions. So a lot of times I think what they really need may be to go run around outside for a while, right? Or they may need, a hug if you're able to do that, right? They may just need you to listen to them and be next to them. I mean, I always think about something that wasn't COVID related, but after the last presidential election 4 years ago, I have a lot of Latino kids, Latina girls also who were really scared, and they said, I'm afraid that my family is going to be sent back to Mexico. One little girl came in and asked me, do I have to put my things in a bag tonight and leave? And she was blinking back tears. And so I feel like in that situation, a lot of it applies to COVID. I made sure not to overpromise anything, but told her kind of what reassuring facts I could. And a lot of our day wasn't so much about conversation as it was about, taking a walk outside, like doing writer's workshop out in the school garden that day, and doing some artwork and just kind of some things that would let them kind of process it and feel a sense of peace in this really scary moment for them.
Can you describe a time when, at least relatively recently, you were able to comfort and reassure a child who had maybe some fears related to the pandemic?
Yeah, two things come to mind. One is a student in my class who just was really curious. I'm not even sure she was scared, but she was really wanting to know about how this all started and I kind of went with advice I got from a friend of mine who's a therapist who said whether it's something scary globally or nationally like COVID or something hard going on in their family like a divorce, the important thing is to kind of answer their questions, but don't go into realms beyond what they're asking about. Just find out what they're curious about. And for her, I just kind of tried to make it hopeful with that idea of look for the helpers and said, this is scary that it's all over the world, but that also means we have scientists in virtually every country trying to work on treatments, trying to work on a vaccine, trying to work out how to keep us safe. And then we talked about that idea of how she could be a helper and, how she could just help out her family when it was stressful. Just the idea of wearing a mask if kids are at school face-to-face, which is a lot of our schools right now, how important that is. And then I think as a parent, just, I wrote about this in the piece, but my son, cut his arm and he just started sobbing, not from the pain, but because he was so scared that we'd have to take him to the emergency room and we might get COVID. And that's something that's really surprised me, is just how many teachers and students I've met whose anxiety isn't about themselves getting sick as much as it is about giving it to someone else. Like teachers worrying that if they give it to a kid and they give it to their grandmother and she dies, that's something they'll have to live with. And for my son, he wasn't so much worried about his arm. He was worried because he knew that older people are more vulnerable and he was really scared for us. And so it ended up leading to one of the most meaningful conversations we've had, but it kind of unleashed this flood of things that I didn't even realize were there for him, because I think sometimes it's beneath the surface until something like that happens and it all comes out.
Next, Wendy Ostroff talks to senior editor Tara Leskowski.
So can you give us like 3 to 4 tips on what you think, how you think we could keep the social in remote learning, especially for younger kids?
Sure. I think first we really have to remember that all learning is social. So the way that kids have learned throughout tens of thousands of years of evolution is with other kids and in that kind of interchange with people. So my first tip is to make any distance learning as social and as collaborative as possible, because it's easy to fall into a didactic mode where the teacher is telling and the students are listening. And especially for our youngest learners, the point of school isn't just checking the boxes of the learning outcomes for the class. The point of school for a lot of us, and I think a lot of experts might argue that that's the most important point of school, is the kind of social learning that happens sometimes outside of the lesson. So if there's any way we can do that in this remote environment, using breakout rooms and Zoom is a great one, but also after class. What I'm seeing with a lot of young kids is that they're able to engage during the school day, but as soon as they're done at noon or 1 o'clock or 2 o'clock, they have an emptiness where they're not getting to play with their friends. So I think teachers need to bridge that gap for students, to help them connect with learning buddies, to help them connect with kids to read with, to create book clubs, to create online gaming formats that kids can get into, or just a hangout room, just a place to go to help with homework or to draw together, to come together and draw or to make some plans. I think there's really a disconnect for a lot of kids from the school life and then the social life, which there's kind of an emptiness for them when the school day is over. My second tip has to do with giving kids choice, and I think that brings them into the social engagement in their own classroom. So if they get to decide the topics that they're studying, if they get to choose from a menu of options, if they get to decide the modality that they can engage in, that has a lot to do with their intrinsic motivation. And I think that's one of the problems we're seeing in distance learning for our youngest learners especially, is that they're able to do the work, but it's very top down, that they're responding to what the teacher wants. Mm-hmm. They're giving the teacher what he or she wants, but that their own motivation, that their own desire and passion to do things is sort of waning as we're going into this for months and months. So letting kids choose and pairing them up with other kids that have similar interests so that they can feed off one another, so that they can get inspired by one another. And that kind of brings me to my third tip, is to be playful, that little kids need to play, and play is the critical ingredient for their learning, especially at young ages. So we can give them playful opportunities in Zoom, but oftentimes I'm seeing teachers themselves are not feeling very playful, and the teachers are sort of stressed. And the way the teachers set up the culture of the class really impacts the ability of kids to find that room. And it's being playful as in, games and joy and surprise, but also the play, like a rubber band has play. So if you have the opportunity to stretch things in new ways as a teacher, for you to be enthusiastic, for you to be exploratory, for you to take a risk and share something about yourself with the children.
That's it for this episode, but we'll be back next month talking about educator wellness. In the meantime, look for extended content on ASCD's YouTube page and our streaming video site. And make sure you check out the November issue of Educational Leadership. For ASCD, I'm Anthony Rabora. Thanks for joining us.